Welcome to my soft watercolor background tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll try to show you how to make a soft watercolor background for your paintings. To see how I use this type of background in my paintings, you can check out my Kingfisher video. I will put a link for that in the description box below. Now there are quite a few ways in which you can get this soft watercolor background, and it's not just with watercolor. In fact, in this tutorial I'll be using Tombow brush markers and Arteza real brush pens, watercolor pencils by Faber-Castell, Neocolor II wax pastels by Caran and Winsor and Newton Watercolor. So first I'm going to use the Tombow brush markers. I am using mainly greens and yellows to achieve a greenish kind of background, but you can use any colors you like. It just depends on the type of background you're trying to achieve. First, you want to get all the colors ready on the painting palette. I'm using the painting palette by Caran, and because I'm using the water-soluble Tombow markers, I'm putting the colors down on the smooth side of this palette. This painting palette has two sides, the rough side for water-soluble pencils and pastels, and the smooth side that works really well with water-soluble markers. But for this technique, you don't really need to buy a special painting palette. You can just use a Ziploc bag or a blending palette that comes with a pack of Tombow brush markers or any other kind of smooth surface. So once you got the colors ready on the palette, you can now add water onto your paper. Try to add the water as evenly as possible so as not to create puddles on your paper. Puddles on the paper will make your paint gather in those spots and it will dry unevenly. When you're adding the colors with your brush, you want to make sure that your brush is wet but not too wet. You want the colors to flow and blend together, but you don't want to add even more water onto your paper as that will cause puddles. For this particular background, I'm using a size 20 flat brush. I'm mostly using the tip of the brush, but sometimes I'm holding the brush horizontally so as to make thinner lines and marks, and sometimes I'm holding it vertically. Then I can blend the colors together and even them out. Now you can let the paper dry naturally, or you can use a hair dryer or a heat tool. The good thing about using a hair dryer or a heat tool is that you can control to some degree how the paper dries. If you're going to use a heat tool or a hair dryer, you want to make sure that you don't stay over one place for too long. You want to keep moving the hair dryer from side to side and upwards and downwards, just to make sure that all the parts of the paper are drying at the same time. So this is the result you get with the first layer of paint. If you're happy with the way it looks, you can leave it as is, but if you want the color to be more saturated, you can add as many layers as you wish. Now when you add more layers, the process is very much the same, so I'll just speed the video up for the second layer. So for the next example, I am using Arteza real brush pens. These brush pens work very similarly to Tombow markers but are much cheaper. The process and the result of the Arteza brush pens is very similar to those of the Tombow markers, so I'll just speed this part of the video up as well. I must mention though that neither of these markers are light fast, so you wouldn't really use them for any paintings that you would want to hang up on the wall. But they are beautiful and they are great for digital copies and for reprints. But if you are looking for a more light fast solution, go ahead and skip to the next part of this tutorial where I talk about the watercolor pencils, Neocolor II pastels and Winsor and Newton Watercolor, because all of those are light fast and they are great both for reprints and for originals. So the next watercolor background is done with Faber-Castell watercolor pencils, but of course you can use any watercolor pencils you have. Again, Arteza watercolor pencils are much cheaper, and they are not too bad at all. The colors are not as saturated as Faber-Castell's or Caran Museum Aquarelle, but they're quite good. Now for this background you need to use the rough side of the Caran paint palette. Again, if you don't have a Caran paint palette, it's not a big deal. You can easily get away with something like a white plastic cutting board from IKEA. You want it to be white so your colors don't appear different from what they really are. When you apply water to the pencil, you want to make sure that you dissolve the pencil very well before applying the paint to your paper. Apart from that, the process is very similar to the previous examples with the water-soluble markers. So I'll just stop talking and let you listen to some beautiful music. So background number 4 is with Neocolor II Wax Pastels by Caran. I absolutely love those pastels. I chose different colors for this background so as not to bore you too much with the same colors. You can see the colors that I chose on the screen, but I ended up using just the orange and the reds. These pastels were by far my most favorite medium to work with in this tutorial. They kind of felt slightly gluey when being dissolved, but in a good way, and they applied just so beautifully. The result I thought was also very vibrant, and just after a couple of applications, beautiful. I love those pastels. Last but not least, Winsor and Newton Watercolor. The process is again very similar to the previous examples. You want to make sure you mix your colors first before you add water to your paper. When you're adding water to your paper, try to do it as evenly as possible. Because we're trying to achieve a soft watercolor background, you want to make sure you're adding paint from your mixing palette and not straight from the paint pans. If you're using a hair dryer or a heat tool, try to dry your painting as fast as you can and as evenly as you can. If you're happy with the look you've achieved, your background is done. Otherwise, you can add as many layers as you want.
Thank you for watching, and I hope that was useful.